Yeah, so a lot of people here have talked about running logs, but as an actual certificate authority, our experiences are a little bit different. Let's Encrypt is both a log operator as well as a CA, so I sort of get to see both sides of that, and we can talk a little about it. So first, who we are. So Let's Encrypt is a free certificate authority run by the nonprofit ISRG. And we issue certificates. That's the main thing a CA does, right? And so in order to do that, we need CT. And really, that means that we do a lot of logging of things to CT. A lot of the stuff Andrew talked about actually running and keeping the logs up is interesting. And from our perspective, we need to do a bunch of work to ensure that we can reliably log to them. For operators, why you probably care about us is that in terms of number of log entries, we produce by far a large portion of them. That's mostly because we're a free CA, open to all, so we issue a lot of things to a lot of people. We use the ACME protocol. It's standardized as an RFC. And in order to just sort of make sure everyone has a common understanding, I'll just give a really brief version of how ACME actually works, which is that we have an API, you get an account, you contact us to create an order with the sort of identifiers that you want on your certificate, whether that's DNS names, IP addresses, other things if you're not in the Web PKI. We kind of go through a set of API requests to validate domain control, which is really out of scope here, but that's basically making some outgoing request to either DNS or directly to the endpoints to verify that the entity requesting it has control over those domains with a challenge. And then finally, there's an endpoint in ACME called finalize to finalize the order to take that pending request and produce a certificate. Really just a couple steps there. We sign a pre-certificate with our HSMs. We submit that pre-certificate to 2 or more logs to get back SCTs. We then take those SCTs, incorporate them into a new certificate called the final certificate, and then we also log that final certificate into CT. In our implementation, finalize happens synchronously. All of these steps happen, and notably, that means we're making outgoing requests from our CT to these third-party CT logs in our issuance flow, which is very interesting from a reliability perspective. There's a really interesting thing, which is that ACME, the protocol, was designed so that that finalize API can be asynchronous. We can return, and we can go off and do this issuance in the background. But because Let's Encrypt originally started by having the certificate ready as soon as the finalize call returns, we found that a lot of clients rely on that fact, and even though you're supposed to poll the order status to find out if the certificate's ready before you fetch the cert, a lot of clients, if the order is in the pending state still, when finalize returns, throw up their hands and give up. So our attempts at actually making that asynchronous have been met with client intolerance, which is a little bit unfortunate because, as I said, the CT issuance process the CT submission process happens in that finalize call, which is this outgoing network request, which could take a variable amount of time. So this is an unfortunate case of Hiram's law of our observed behavior, even though it wasn't in our API contract, eventually being something we're stuck with. And because of the very large volume of clients we have across all sorts of different client implementations, does mean that we're at least a little bit stuck with that, and we'll continue to hammer and try to make ACME clients happier with that. But for now, we're sort of stuck with this synchronous finalization. And so really what this is thinking about for us is dependency risks. Inside of our CA, we have things that we control. We have these HSMs doing the signing. We have data stores that are storing all of the orders and everything internally. We have these outgoing requests for validation over the internet, which is, has all the exciting internet things of variable traffic and that, but there are things either we control, the people we request who are requesting certificates from us control, or otherwise have some sort of contractual relationship with. And so CT is unique in that perspective in that we don't really have as much control over that, and so we have to manage that risk. Because ultimately, if the CT logs are falling over, they're misbehaving, they're doing something, that's in many ways the biggest outage risk to Let's Encrypt. Not compliance risk, not security risk, really just an outage risk. So we want to make sure that the logs don't fall down. So we do a number of things to manage that risk. The first, most obvious thing, we run our own logs. If we run our own logs, if they go down, rather than sitting being sad that my CA is down, I can go directly handle the fact that the log is down. And as I mentioned in the Q&A, one of our logs currently is down, though fortunately it's just a test log. And we can run multiple logs so that if one Amazon region goes down, we can keep issuing. This is a common strategy. If we look at who the biggest issuers are by number of certs, and we look at who is running CT logs, some of these big issuers are also CT operators, so this is a pretty common strategy. I've included Google. They get a gold star, even though there's some sort of separation between Trust Fabric and Chrome and Google Cloud Trust Services, which I'm not going to attempt to explain. I'm sure some Googlers in the audience can explain that organizational difference to you if you really, really want to know. Maybe we can convince some of these other large bars to run CT logs as well. The next, big thing on our set of things we do to manage CT risk is don't trust the logs. We don't assume that logs are up. We don't assume that logs are returning us well-formed SCTs, and we don't assume that logs are going to hit their MMD because we know that that's a failure mode that they could have. So we need to be careful. And this is something that's bitten other CAs. I think there's many ways that you could, incorporate a cert into the wrong log shard that I think one CA was bitten by. They could have malformed SCTs returned. They could have outages related to assuming that particular sets of logs are up or not, or that particular logs even exist and they're still accepting writes. And because they will eventually break your heart. They are these outside components to your ecosystem, and you need to defend against them in a, not necessarily fully adversarial, but we need to make sure that we're not treating CT logs as trusted third parties for a CA's perspective. The next really big thing that's important for us for managing our uptime is curating the logs and watching those logs for problems. I think we have pretty good monitoring of all of the logs that we're using to, keep on top of them having problems. Reading CT policy mailing lists in the Transparency Dev Slack to get an eye on what log operators are doing. I think one thing that we often do, for example, is if we see it looks like a log might be struggling, we just sort of pull our submission from that log because certainly for us as one of the largest submitters as a CA, I think having our certs disappear from a log could probably help that log operator if they're having risks of MMD merging delays or anything like that. So it's important that we really curate that. We also, talk to some of these log operators to make sure that they can handle our volume. I think there's a couple log operators that we currently don't submit to because they were having trouble, and we just wanted to make sure we're not overwhelming them to keep the ecosystem healthier as a whole. And so, yeah, we got to curate our lovely collection of logs for submission. And finally, the biggest thing we want to keep in mind is that we don't want to crush the ecosystem. We talked a bunch of the MMD delays right now are caused by one particular client that's cross-pollinating between logs that doesn't have any sort of back-off logic and that is sort of continually running into rate limits. And I want to let them be the problematic client and not us. So we want to, be aware of our fire hose of submissions and try not to take the whole ecosystem down. I think the naive solution for many CAs to submit to logs is just to fire a whole bunch and hope that you get some SCTs back, which we sort of very deliberately don't do. This shotgun approach, as some people call it. So I want to talk a little bit more about actually what our submission algorithm is and how we decide what logs to submit to and how that helps us keep the CT ecosystem as healthy as we can. The naive algorithm, as I said, would be just to submit all the logs, wait for them to return some SCTs, and incorporate those SCTs. We take a little bit of a twist on this, which is we figure out what the set of eligible logs for a cert is, filtering by their status and their temporal interval. We pick 2 of those logs and submit to them. Now, as I said, we don't want to trust any 2 logs, so we wait a little bit. Currently are configured to 2 seconds, but that's a value that we could tweak. And if we haven't gotten back 2 SCTs yet, we submit to a 3rd log. If we still don't get a cert back, we submit to a 4th log, and so on until we have a set of compliant SCTs. So it's sort of like the shotgun algorithm, but with head starts for different logs over time. So just as a worked example of what that looks like in our software, we submit to 1 log and log 2, and after that 2-second delay, we submit to a 3rd log. And we're now waiting for 3 logs. If we still don't have a delay, we wait for a 4th log, we submit to it, and so on until we're submitting to n logs in parallel. And eventually, in this case, log 3 returns with the first SCT, and log 2 returns with another one. Now we have this pair of SCTs, and we can cancel the submissions for the other logs. Log 4 in this case returned an error even before we got the 2. So we tried a couple submissions, we got back 2 SCTs, which is what's required to incorporate in that final certificate. Now, most of the time, it's not that complicated. We just submit to 2 logs, we get back SCTs pretty quickly, and we don't even need to try to start submitting to a 3rd. And in the happy case, this is good because it means that we sort of did the minimal amount of work for the whole ecosystem to not bother more than 2 logs with a single submission. There's actually some improvements we should make. For example, in the worked example, I showed that I think it was log 3 returned an error. We didn't start another submission at that time. We probably should because we're sort of waiting for nothing at that point. We just kind of start submission to 2 logs and then check if they form a compliant set of SCTs. This is more important with the static CT transition and the current rule that we have 16962 log. Unfortunately, it's quite challenging to check before you submit if the set of SCTs will form a compliant set, because we could submit to 2 logs, and then the 3rd log, we don't know which of the first 2 might return first, so it gets basically into a constraint solving problem, and then maybe those first 2 logs will return errors and we need to submit to a 4th, and then that check that we did for the 3rd log isn't relevant because it's actually the 3rd and the 4th that'll return. So it's not something that we have today, but we would really like to. And finally, the other improvement that's on my list of things we really should do is better automatic health checking and back off. I mentioned that we have to curate our logs, and that's a lot of monitoring the log status and metrics and CT policy. And we think that's something that whenever there's something that human operators have to do, it's much better solved with automation. So we'd like to add more of that. We don't have it today, though, which is a little unfortunate, but keeps us on our toes as we watch everyone's logs. There's a whole nother set of submissions which don't follow this algorithm at all, which is what we call informational submission. Right now, we submit pre-certs as well as the final certs informationally to logs. This is what we do for testing logs. For example, the static CT logs, we do informational submission to them to make sure that they can handle our load before they're usable and we can start getting real SCTs, as well as final certificates, which we want to appear in logs, even though they're not required by our operation, just to ensure that they're logged and so that Andrew can email us when we issue incorrect pre-cert and final cert certificates. For informational submission, we do something much simpler. We just asynchronously submit all of them to a small set of logs that we know are, quote, good. And if they fail, they fail. It's no big deal if we lose one or two here and there, especially because they'll eventually end up in logs from any number of other sources as well. We also need to test all of this infrastructure. In my worked example, I showed we had a bunch of interesting cases of logs taking too long or returning an error. But most of the time we don't hit those cases. We just successfully submit. So we want to make sure that our code continues to stay robust to all of the different failure cases. So we actually have a deliberately bad CT log called CT test serve, which is configured to return a number of errors on some percentage. So in the Let's Encrypt staging environment, you'll get back SCTs from this CT test serve logs, which aren't even really a full log. It's just the submission endpoints. They don't bother persisting anything. Because it is our staging test environment, we can be fairly confident that those are not going to be too much of a problem. This is in the Boulder, the software that powers our CA's source code. So we don't have to do too much extra maintenance on it, and we can use it in our unit tests and everything to really make sure that we're staying robust. This is something that definitely, if other CAs are interested in collaborating on our deliberately bad CT log that ruins your ice cream, we can add lots of different problems there to make sure everyone's testing and being robust. And that brings me to really what are some collaboration opportunities here, and why I'm at this is that I would love to share more code in general here. In particular, the submission code is something that we've spent a number of pull request cycles tweaking and making more robust, and we actually think it's still not quite there yet. And so if we're not quite there yet, I suspect other CAs probably have similar problems, and I would love to work with other CAs on sharing that. We recently had a chat with another CA who was interested in that, which sort of inspired this whole thing. The client itself is mostly Go, wrapping the certificate transparency Go library to handle the actual submission. Unfortunately, it's rather integrated into our CA software today, and would be challenging to pull out. It has a bunch of our internal RPC mechanisms and stuff stuck into it. But maybe we could take some of these ideas and rewrite it in the upstream certificate transparency Go library or somewhere else. And I would love to hear from others if that's something you want to work on, or how we can share things. And I think this is the kind of thing where the benefits to log operators really are that we can hopefully improve the ecosystem as a whole. One of the big things about not doing shotgun submission is that with shotgun, you submit to every log all at once, which means that if you add more log operators to the ecosystem, it doesn't really help anyone. But with our approach of submitting to as few logs as possible, that means that every time you add another log or another log shard, the actual load on each individual log goes down just that little bit. And we think that really is a pretty big difference in terms of ensuring that the ecosystem stays healthy, because adding more log operators means that the next log operator after that has to do even less work. So I think that's has an ecosystem benefit for everyone. If you want to stay in touch, I've got some links here. Let's Encrypt has a community forum where you're always welcome to reach us, ask for help. And I've got some links here for staying in touch with myself. All right, Q&A time.
Questions? Yeah.
Hello, thank you for the talk. Does the software prioritize the Let's Encrypt logs in any specific way, or are they just logs amongst the other ones?
Yeah, no, we don't prioritize our own logs, except for the thing I mentioned about informational submission. In that case, we just submit to Google, Filippo, and our own logs. It's just 3 operators rather than the full ecosystem, mostly because we sort of know that they can handle our write traffic. But the software itself has no hard coding except for the configuration about what logs we submit to. One of the other improvements I didn't list as a potential improvement is we would be interested in having some sort of weighted submission, but we haven't done that today.
How do you handle multiple logs from a single operator with that whole algorithm there?
Right, so we don't have any real special handling other than I sort of said we wait for a compliant set of SCTs. So the compliant set check is checking that one, we have no more than one static CT log, and two, that like SCTs are from different operators. So it is possible in sort of the degenerate case with our current implementation that we submit to 2 logs from the same operator. We get back 2 SCTs and we're like, oh, whoops, that was a mistake, and we have to submit to a 3rd log. Because the sort of ratio of logs per operator and number of operators today, that sort of just like statistically doesn't happen very much, but it is I would call it a bug in our current implementation. But this goes back to the sort of it being slightly hard to predict ahead of time, because if I submit to 2 logs from the same operator, I don't know which one of those I'll get a SCT back from first. So we could probably do a little bit better prioritization to try to do that, but today, yeah, it doesn't handle it in the optimal way.
Hey, so I was curious how many eligible logs there usually are that you can submit to, excluding ones that you run yourself and ones that you've disqualified. And I'm curious how you feel about that number as well.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I think it's sort of on the order of like 10 shards, right? Because there's sort of like 5-ish operators, some of which have 2 or 3 logs running at a time. So I think it's probably about 10, but I haven't actually looked off the top of my head. In terms of how I feel about it, I think that's actually, maybe just on a little bit, not quite enough, but close. I'd feel better if there was another log operator or 2. And actually with the recent static CT log support, we have got a couple extra log operators, which I think once those are in the usable state in the log programs, certainly I'll be happy with roughly the number of log operators.
Thank you. Would you consider, especially with static CT, to check the inclusion of the SCTs that you return, or would that add too much latency?
Oh yeah, that's something we're not doing today. We're not checking inclusion, at least synchronously. We have a number of what I call data pipeline improvements planned for next year that we're doing, and one of the things we do want to do is actually check inclusion. I think that goes back to also better automatic health checking. We would like to, if we see a log start to not have inclusion done in a timely fashion, automatically stop submission to that log, because they're probably suffering on MMDs or something, but we just haven't written that code yet. Both from the having that health check hook in our code, as well as having something monitoring for inclusion. Just a to-do. We got lots of to-dos.
Hi. So on that note, Apple has recently published a proposal for a log endpoint where you can check the status of the log automatically. We really think that would help both CA operators and the CT log programs. So please, all of you, take a look at that proposal on the CT policy list.
Yes. Yeah, and actually that's something where, we talked about curating. I think one of the things in that proposal is having a list of sort of upcoming changes. So one of our first priorities is going to be making sure that if a log operator has announced that they're going to go read-only or make some changes to their logs, we can automatically pull it out of our curated set. So definitely excited about that, though I have many technical nits on the proposal as written, but that's because it's a proposal and not a proposed thing. So I actually spent my flight to this conference writing a bunch of code to interact with the new proposal, so definitely looking forward to it. Thank you.
Any more? No? Well, in that case, let's thank Matthew again.
All right, thank you.